It began with a quiet morning, the kind that feels completely ordinary until you realize later that it was the last moment everything made sense. Because on May 25th, 1979, in New York City, a 6-year-old boy named Etan Patz stepped out of his apartment building
for what should have been one of the simplest journeys of his young life. Just 2 blocks to his school bus stop.
A short walk that symbolized independence, trust, and the beginning of growing up. But within minutes, that routine moment would transform into one of the most haunting disappearances in American history. And what makes this case so deeply unsettling isn't just that a child vanished, it's that he vanished in broad daylight, in a busy neighborhood, during morning hours.
When the streets were active, when people were moving, when the world was awake, and yet somehow, no one saw enough.
No one noticed enough. No one stopped what was about to happen, so stay with me. Because as we go deeper into this story, you'll begin to understand that this isn't just a missing child case. It's a moment that changed how the world sees safety, forever. And by the end, you'll be left with the same chilling question that has echoed for decades. How does a child disappear? In the middle of a city without a trace, the timeline begins with a decision that seemed small at the time, but it would later carry unimaginable weight. Etan's parents allowed him to walk to the bus stop alone for the first time, something that was not unusual in that era, something that many families considered safe, especially in a neighborhood that felt familiar and secure. And that's what makes this detail so powerful, because it represents trust, the belief that the world outside the door is manageable, predictable, and safe enough for a child to navigate. But on that morning, something broke that trust.
Something interrupted a routine so ordinary it should have passed without notice. Witnesses later reported seeing
carrying his school bag, looking like any other child heading to school. There was nothing unusual about his behavior, nothing that suggested fear or hesitation. And then, suddenly, the trail begins to fade. Sightings become uncertain, fragmented, inconsistent, and within a matter of minutes, a clear timeline turns into a gap filled with questions. Because the distance was so short, the time window so narrow, that whatever happened had to occur quickly, quietly, and with a level of control that prevented attention. And that realization is what makes this case so chilling.
Because it suggests that in a place filled with people, in a moment filled with activity, something significant can happen without being fully seen.
I couldn't fully grasp it, but when Etan didn't come home, the concern, it turned into panic. Instantly, his parents contacted authorities, and what followed was a search effort that was unprecedented at the time. Police, volunteers, community members all mobilized,
canvassing the area, distributing flyers, speaking to anyone who might have seen something. But despite the scale of the effort,
despite the urgency, no clear answers emerged, no confirmed location, no definitive explanation, just an absence that grew heavier with each passing hour. And that absence began to shape the narrative of the case. Because in missing person investigations, especially those involving children, the first hours are critical. And in this case, those hours passed without resolution, leaving behind a trail that was already growing cold. Investigators explored multiple possibilities, one of the most prominent being abduction, the idea that someone had taken Etan during that short walk. And this theory introduced a level of fear that extended far beyond this single case, because it suggested that children could be targeted in everyday situations. The truth is, danger existed here, in plain sight, and our focus has shifted to those who had access to these victims.
Opportunity or motive. Suspects were identified, questioned, and in some cases, publicly scrutinized.
But none of these leads provided a definitive answer at the time, and the case remained open, unresolved, a mystery that lingered in the public consciousness. But what makes this story even more complex is what happened in the years that followed, because as time passed, it became clear this was far from over. New information began to surface, including confessions and testimonies that would bring the case back into the spotlight.
Decades after the initial disappearance, one individual came forward with a confession that seemed to provide answers.
I went back and I re-examined the timeline. There was a window, a gap of several minutes. I think I know what happened during that time. And while this development was significant, it did not eliminate all questions. Because in cases like this, especially those that span decades, evidence can be difficult to verify, memories can be unreliable, and the line between truth and perception can become blurred. And that's what makes this case so uniquely unsettling. Because even as answers begin to form, they exist alongside uncertainty, alongside doubt, alongside the possibility that there are still pieces of the story that remain hidden. And as you think about this, consider the broader impact, because this case didn't just affect one family, it changed an entire society.
It led to increased awareness about child safety. It influenced how parents approached everyday decisions.
It even contributed to national movements focused on missing children, including the establishment of awareness campaigns and the recognition of National Missing Children's Day, which is observed on May 25th, the same day Etan disappeared. And that connection serves as a reminder that this case is not just a story, it's a turning point. A moment where the world began to understand that the unthinkable could happen in the most ordinary circumstances. The theories surrounding what happened. The Etan Patz case continues to be discussed, analyzed, and debated. Some believe it has reached a level of resolution
Through the confessions and legal outcomes that followed. While others question whether every detail has been fully confirmed.
whether the narrative that has been accepted truly represents the full truth. And that ongoing discussion is what keeps this case alive.
Because it highlights the complexity of understanding events that occurred in a brief moment,
Under conditions that were not fully observed. And as we reach the end of this story, one question remains. The same question that has lingered since that morning in New York City. Somewhere between the apartment door and the bus stop, in those few minutes, lies the answer. It's a moment that changed everything, and until every aspect of that moment is fully understood, this case will continue to stand. The Black Dahlia. Her haunting smile frozen in time, a mystery that continues to echo through the decades. The fragility of safety, the limits of perception, and the unsettling reality that even in the most familiar environments, the darkness waits. Even during the most routine moments, something can happen that changes everything forever. And that is what makes this story so unforgettable. The idea that a child could simply vanish, leaving behind nothing but questions.
I've seen a lot of cases, but this one, it's different.
Memories and a silence that has echoed for decades.